The night of July 22, 1934, was not just hot, it was suffocating. Chicago was baking under a heatwave that had turned the asphalt of Lincoln Avenue into a sticky black paste. The air smelled of exhaust fumes, stale popcorn from the Biograph Theater, and the nervous, metallic sweat of a city living on the edge of a nervous breakdown. It was a night that felt heavy, as if the humidity itself was pressing down on the shoulders of the pedestrians, warning them that something violent was about to tear the sky open. Inside the theater, the man the world knew as Public Enemy No. 1 sat in the cooling darkness, watching Clark Gable in Manhattan melodrama. It was a film about a gangster who dies in the electric chair, a poetic, almost cruel final request for a man who knew his own time was running out. Or at least, that is what history wants you to believe. We all know the official story. It is the story J. Edgar Hoover fed to the newspapers before the blood was even dry on the sidewalk. We know that John Dillinger walked out of that theater, blinked in the glare of the marquee lights, was betrayed by the lady in red, and was gunned down by FBI agents in a hail of glory. We know that the body was displayed at the morgue for thousands of gawking spectators, a trophy of the government's victory over crime. But what if the man lying on that cold slab, riddled with bullets, wasn't John Dillinger? What if the real John Dillinger was already miles away? Sitting in the passenger seat of a black Packard, his face bandaged, his hands shaking, driven by a woman whose beauty was only matched by her terrifying capacity for deception, history calls her a myth. The FBI files dismiss her as a rumor. But in the shadowed, classified corners of the intelligence world, she was known only as the Angel. Her real name, if she ever gave it, was Ilsa. She was not a gangster's mole. She was not a desperate girlfriend looking for a thrill in the underworld. She was a ghost. A spy. A woman with ice water in her veins and a figure that could stop a man's heart from across the room. She was the architect of the greatest magic trick in American history. And she is the reason why the grave of John Dillinger might just be empty. To understand the escape, you must first understand the trap. By the summer of 1934, John Dillinger was a walking corpse. The carefree days of robbing banks and charming the press were over. He was trapped in Chicago, bleeding money, his gang dead or captured, his face plastered on every post office wall in America. The FBI had designated him as a creature to be hunted down and destroyed. He was paranoid, jumping at shadows, living in squalor despite the thousands of dollars in his pockets. He was a brute force instrument in a world that was becoming sophisticated. He needed a miracle. What he got was Ilsa. They didn't meet in a dive bar or a bank. They met in the high-stakes VIP room of an underground casino run by the mob on the North Side. Witnesses, those few who survived the violent purge of that era, described Ilsa as a vision that didn't belong in the grime of the criminal underworld. She was tall, statuesque, with platinum blonde hair styled in the waves of a Hollywood siren. She wore a backless dress of midnight blue silk that clung to her hourglass curves like a second skin, moving like liquid when she walked. Her scent was not gin and cheap tobacco, it was French lavender and gunpowder. When she sat at Dillinger's table, the room went quiet. Men like Dillinger were used to women who feared them or women who wanted their money. Ilsa did neither. She studied him with eyes that were cold, calculating, and dangerously intelligent. "You look tired, John," she reportedly said, her voice a smoky whisper that cut through the noise of the slot machines and the jazz band. "You're running a race you can't win. Hoover doesn't want to catch you anymore. He wants to erase you." Dillinger, drunk on whiskey and paranoia, reached for the .38 caliber pistol tucked under his jacket. Ilsa didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply lit a cigarette with a gold lighter and played her ace. "I can't save your life, John. The world needs John Dillinger to die. But I can save you." This was the beginning of the Angel Protocol. Ilsa was not working for the mob. Theories that have surfaced decades later suggest she was an independent contractor for a European intelligence agency, possibly British MI6 or a precursor to the CIA. War was brewing in Europe. The world was about to catch fire with the rise of fascism, and intelligence agencies were desperate for men who could kill without conscience, men who could rob enemy vaults, men who could move through the shadows and blow up supply lines. Dillinger was a thug to the FBI, but to Ilse, he was a raw asset. A weapon that just needed to be polished. She didn't see a criminal, she saw a commando. For 3 weeks, Ilse hid Dillinger in a safe house on the Gold Coast of Chicago. A luxury apartment that belonged to a diplomat who was out of town. It was here that the transformation began. It was a process of breaking the man to build the spy. She wasn't just his lover, she was his handler. She stripped him of his country mannerisms. She slapped him when he slurred his words. She taught him how to walk without that famous gangster swagger, how to speak without snarling. She hired a disgraced surgeon to perform minor alterations on his face, changing the hairline, removing the famous mole. But the most crucial part of her plan was the switch. Ilse knew that for Dillinger to live, a body had to be found. The FBI needed a trophy. J. Edgar Hoover's career depended on a dead gangster. If they gave him one, he wouldn't look too closely at the dental records. He would want to close the file, enter Jimmy Lawrence. If this story has a victim, it is him. Jimmy was a small-time petty thief, a drifter who hung around the North Side bars looking for an easy mark. He had no family, no connections, and no future. His only crime was a striking, uncanny, almost cursed resemblance to John Dillinger. He had the same build, the same dark hair, the same brooding eyes. He was the perfect lamb for the slaughter. Ilse found him. She didn't kidnap him, she seduced him. With the predatory grace of a spider, she spun a web around this poor, unsuspecting man. She approached him at a bar, flashing a smile that could melt steel. She told Jimmy that she was a talent scout, that she could make him a star, that she loved him. For 2 weeks, Jimmy Lawrence lived in a dream. He was dating the most beautiful woman in Chicago. She bought him expensive clothes, suits that were identical to the ones Dillinger wore. She convinced him to dye his hair slightly to match John's shade perfectly, claiming it was for a photo shoot. She fed him, loved him, and made him feel like a king. Jimmy Lawrence thought he was the luckiest man in Chicago. He didn't know he was being fattened up for the morgue. He didn't know that every time Ilse kissed him, she was checking his height against the measurements of the man hiding in the back room. The genius of Ilse's plan lay in the orchestration of the betrayal. The Lady in Red. Anna Sage is historically remembered as the traitor who sold Dillinger out to the FBI to save herself from deportation. But Ilse was the puppet master pulling Anna Sage's strings. It was Ilse who brokered the deal with the FBI, using Anna as the face of the operation because she knew Anna was expendable. Ilse knew the FBI would be too eager to question the source. She orchestrated the timing perfectly. She told Anna Sage to wear red, or orange, as the records state, so the agents couldn't miss her in the crowd. It was theatrical. It was designed to draw the eye. It was a stage play, and everyone had their marks. On the night of July 22nd, the air was electric with impending death. But the man who walked into the Biograph Theater that night was not John Dillinger. It was Jimmy Lawrence. He was wearing John's clothes, carrying a gun he barely knew how to use, which Ilse had given him, telling him it was a prop for the movie role she had promised him. He was walking beside Anna Sage, believing he was on a double date with a friend of his beautiful girlfriend, Ilse. He was happy. He was eating popcorn. Meanwhile, the real John Dillinger was 3 miles away, sitting in a dark room, staring at a mirror, his face swollen from the fresh surgery, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was trembling. For the first time in his life, the gunman was afraid. Not of death, but of the woman who held his life in her manicured hands. He realized then that he was no longer the public enemy, he was just another pawn in Ilse's game. When the movie ended and the crowd spilled out onto the sidewalk, the heat was still oppressive. Jimmy Lawrence stepped out, blinking. He must have looked confused when the agents shouted. He didn't run like a gangster, he froze like a confused civilian. He reached for his belt, perhaps to pull up his pants, perhaps to reach for the gun he was told to carry. He never had a chance. The FBI agents, fueled by adrenaline and the pressure from Hoover, opened fire immediately. 3 bullets. The man fell face down on the pavement. The crowd screamed. The agents high-fived. They had their monster. They had their headline. They didn't check the fingerprints on the spot. They just saw the face, the clothes, and the gun, but back at the Cook County morgue, anomalies began to surface immediately, anomalies that were quickly, and suspiciously, hushed up. The corpse had brown eyes, John Dillinger had clear grey eyes. The corpse showed signs of a rheumatic heart condition from childhood. Dillinger was an athlete who had played semi-pro baseball and had a perfect heart. The corpse was missing a specific scar on the upper lip that Dillinger was famous for. The corpse was shorter and heavier. The pathologist pointed these out. But the order came down from high above: it is Dillinger. Close the case. Hoover couldn't afford a mistake. The press was told it was Dillinger. The body was buried under tons of concrete and scrap iron to prevent grave robbers, or perhaps, as the conspiracy goes, to prevent anyone from ever digging it up and realizing that the DNA would never match. And where was the angel? While the flashbulbs popped at the Biograph and the blood was being washed off the sidewalk, a black Packard was speeding west on Route 66, cutting through the cornfields of Illinois. Ilsa was at the wheel, driving with a calm, terrifying precision. Next to her sat a man with bandaged cheeks, dyed hair, and eyes that had seen too much. The dynamic between them had shifted permanently. Dillinger was no longer the boss. He was the cargo. Ilsa had saved him, yes, but she had also enslaved him. She had stripped him of his name, his fame, his gang, and his identity. John Dillinger died tonight, she told him as they crossed the state line, her silhouette framed by the moonlight, looking more like a movie star than a fugitive. The smoke from her cigarette swirled around them. You are someone else now. You belong to the agency. You belong to me. Dillinger looked out the window at the passing darkness, realizing that the prison he was entering had no bars, but it was inescapable. The trail goes cold after 1934, but whispers in the intelligence community suggest a strange afterlife for the ghost of Dillinger. Declassified documents from the British War Office mention an American operative used for high-risk theft operations in occupied France during World War II. A man who was an expert with a Thompson submachine gun. A man who could crack any safe in Europe. A man who moved with the silent, deadly grace of a bank robber but fought for the Allies. Was it him? Did the public enemy become a secret hero? Or did he live out his days on a vineyard in Argentina, watching the sun set, haunted by the memory of Jimmy Lawrence, the innocent man who died in his place? There is a photograph, taken by a press reporter in the chaos outside the Biograph Theater that night. The focus is on the body being loaded into the police wagon. But if you look in the background, near the edge of the frame, half hidden by the shadows of a street lamp, you can see a woman. She is wearing a cloche hat and a high-collared coat that looks too expensive for the crowd. She isn't looking at the body with horror or curiosity. She is looking at her watch. And on her face, there is no sadness. Just the faint, terrifying, satisfied smile of a woman who knows that everything, down to the last bullet, went exactly according to plan. The angel of death didn't come for John Dillinger that night. She came with him, and she drove him away into the eternal darkness, leaving us with nothing but a legend, a lie, and an empty name on a heavy grave.